The words, spoken in the innocent, clear voice of an 11-year-old, sliced through the opulent silence of the penthouse office. "Ma'am, that's my dad's signature." Lyra stood in the middle of the vast room, her small frame dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering city below. Her finger was pointed at the grand, framed patent on the wall, the very document that had founded the billion-dollar Croft automotive empire. The company's CEO, Fiona Croft, looked up from her desk, the pen in her hand hovering over a contract, her brow furrowed, not with anger, but with a deep, profound confusion. Her gaze shifted from the little girl to the janitor mopping the floor by the window, the girl's father who had frozen in place. Kalen Archer's knuckles were bone white on the handle of his mop. The rhythmic, circular motions he had been making for the past hour had ceased entirely. He looked pale, terrified, like a ghost who had just seen his own grave. He wasn't looking at Fiona. His eyes were locked on his daughter, a silent, desperate plea in them. "No, Lyra. Please, no." Fiona's gaze followed Lyra's finger back to the patent. She knew it by heart. Patent US 7,138,914 B2. Dynamic sensor fusion for predictive collision avoidance. It was the bedrock of her company, the technology that had made Croft Automotive a titan of industry. And at the bottom, the signature of the inventor, a confident, elegant script she saw every day. She looked back at the janitor. A cold, impossible question began to form in her mind. "Honey, what did you say?" Fiona asked, her voice softer than she intended, trying to unravel the bizarre interruption. Lyra, unafraid, took a step closer to the wall. "That signature. It's my dad's. He used to sign my birthday cards the same way, with that little loop on the A in Archer." The world tilted. Kalen felt the air suck out of his lungs. For 5 years he had lived in the shadows, a ghost haunting the halls of a company built on his own genius. He'd taken this job, this humiliating, back-breaking work, for one reason. The pay was steady, enough to keep a roof over Lyra's head and afford the tuition for the one good school in their district. He had built a fortress of invisibility around himself, and his daughter, in one innocent, observant sentence, had just leveled it. "Mr. Archer," Fiona said, her voice now sharp, professional. The CEO was back in control. "Is this some kind of joke?" Kalen finally tore his eyes away from Lyra and looked at the most powerful woman in the city. He saw not malice, but a sharp, analytical intelligence trying to compute an error in the system. "No, ma'am. Of course not," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "Lyra, apologize to Miss Croft. We're disturbing her." He tugged at his daughter's sleeve, trying to pull her away, to retreat back into the shadows. But Lyra stood her ground. "But it is, Dad." Look, Fiona stood up. She was a tall, commanding woman, and her tailored suit seemed to radiate authority. She walked over to the wall, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. She peered at the signature, a name she had never met, the name of a brilliant engineer her father had bought this patent from years ago, right before he passed away. She had always been told the man was a recluse who wanted no part of the corporate world. Then, she turned and walked back to her desk, her expression unreadable. She tapped a few keys on her computer, her eyes scanning the screen. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew what she was doing. She was pulling his employee file. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the quiet hum of the building's climate control. Kalen could feel beads of sweat trickling down his back. This was it. This was how it ended. He'd be fired, blacklisted. Victor Blackwell would hear about this, and he would come for them. He would finish what he started 5 years ago. Fiona's printer whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper. She picked it up and walked back towards Kalen, her eyes holding his. She held the paper next to the framed patent. On it was a scanned copy of his employment contract. At the bottom was his signature, Kalen Archer. The two signatures, one on a billion-dollar patent and one on a janitor's contract, were identical. The confident, looping A, the sharp, decisive cross of the T. They were undeniably, irrefutably the same. Fiona lowered the paper, her face a mask of controlled shock. The story she had been told her entire life, the foundation of her father's legacy and her own career, was suddenly riddled with cracks. "My apologies, Lyra," Fiona said, her voice quiet but firm, addressing the girl directly. "You are quite right. They do look the same." She then turned her steely gaze back to Kaylin. "My office. Now. Lyra, you can wait out here with my assistant." Kaylin's blood ran cold. This was worse than being fired. This was an interrogation. "Ma'am, it's a misunderstanding. A coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences of this magnitude, Mr. Archer," Fiona said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "My office." He looked at his daughter, who seemed to sense the sudden gravity of the situation, her earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of worry. He gave her a weak, reassuring smile he didn't feel. "It's okay, sweetie. I'll just be a minute." As he followed Fiona Croft into her sprawling, immaculate office, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a soft, final click, Kaylin felt like he was walking to his own execution. He had spent 5 years running from his past, and now it had finally cornered him on the 50th floor. He had no more room to run. The office was like a cathedral of corporate power. A single lamp on Fiona's massive mahogany desk cast a warm, intimidating glow, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. The closed door shut out the rest of the world, creating a pocket of unnerving silence. Kaylin felt his collar tighten, his janitor's uniform suddenly feeling like a costume for a part he never wanted to play. Fiona Croft didn't sit behind her desk. She leaned against the front of it, her arms crossed, studying him with an intensity that stripped away all pretense. She was no longer just his boss. She was a judge, and his entire life was on trial. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Mr. Archer," she began, her voice low and even, yet carrying an edge of tempered steel. "Explain it to me. And do not insult my intelligence by calling it a coincidence." Kaylin's mind raced, searching for an escape route, a plausible lie. Fear, cold and sharp, was a physical presence in the room. It wasn't just fear of losing his job. It was the deep, primal fear of Victor Blackwell. Victor had buried him once. He wouldn't hesitate to do it again, permanently. For Lyra's sake, he had to keep the past buried. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my name is Kaylin Archer. The inventor's name on that patent is also Kaylin Archer. It's a rare name, I know, but it's not impossible." Fiona cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "The name is not the problem. The signature is. Penmanship is like a fingerprint. The odds of two different people having that exact signature, with that exact loop on the A your daughter pointed out, are astronomical. So, let's stop wasting time." She took a step toward him. "My father bought that patent 5 years ago. He told me the story. He bought it from a brilliant engineer who had decided to leave the field, a recluse who wanted to disappear. He paid the man's partner, a man named Victor Blackwell, who handled the entire transaction. My father never even met the inventor. He just signed the checks. Now, for the past 5 years, I have been running a company based on the work of a man I believe to be a ghost. And tonight, I find out that ghost is mopping my floors. So, you will tell me what is going on. You will tell me why my company's founding patent has your signature on it. And you will tell me right now, the name, Victor Blackwell, hit Kaylin like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken aloud in this office, by this woman, shattered the last of his composure. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his past crumbled into dust. The memories, the pain he had suppressed for 5 years, came rushing back in a tidal wave of grief and rage. He sank into one of the leather chairs opposite her desk, his body suddenly too heavy to support itself. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The fight was gone. There was only exhaustion and the aching sorrow of what he had lost. He didn't just take the patent. Kalen's voice was a ragged whisper, muffled by his hands. He took everything. Fiona remained silent, her expression shifting from impatience to a guarded, intense curiosity. She recognized the sound of genuine pain. This wasn't a trick. This was a confession. Kalen looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. My wife, her name was Elena. She was an architect, brilliant. She saw the world in lines and angles, beauty in everything. One night we were driving home. It was raining. The roads were slick. Someone ran a red light. The impact? It was on her side. He paused, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. Fiona remained motionless, listening. The police said it was just an accident. But the car, it was a top-of-the-line model. It was supposed to be the safest car on the market, but the safety systems failed. The side impact sensors, the airbag deployment, none of it worked the way it was supposed to. She died in my arms before the paramedics even arrived. The story poured out of him now. A torrent of grief held back for too long. I couldn't let it go. I was an engineer. I designed safety systems. I got the accident reports, the specs for the car. I found the flaw. A tiny miscalculation in the sensor fusion algorithm. In a crisis, the system got overwhelmed and shut down. It was a fatal mistake, so I quit my job. I poured all our savings, all of my time into fixing it. I wanted to build something that could never fail. Something that could see an accident before it happened and protect the people inside. I called it the Angel Guard system. He looked toward the patent on the wall, a bitter irony twisting his features. Victor was my partner. My best friend. He handled the business side while I worked in the lab. We were going to change the world, save lives, but he got an offer, a massive one. From your father, Fiona's face was pale. She was starting to understand. I told him it wasn't ready. Kalen continued, his voice cracking with the memory of the betrayal. I needed another 6 months of testing. I wouldn't sell it. I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it for Elena, for her memory. Victor didn't care. He saw dollar signs. We fought. The next day I went to the lab, and the doors were locked. He had cleaned me out, my prototypes, my data, everything. He used a forged power of attorney to sell the patent to your father, filing it under my name to make the sale look legitimate. Then he accused me of trying to steal the technology for myself. He planted evidence, paid off a witness. He called me unstable, grief-stricken, a corporate spy. He destroyed my reputation. No one would hire me. No one would even listen to me. I lost my career, my friends, my wife's legacy. He buried me. He finally looked at Fiona, his eyes pleading for her to understand the depth of his despair. I took this job because I had nothing left, because I had a daughter to feed, and because every day I wanted to see the thing that destroyed my life. I wanted to look at it and remember why I had to keep fighting for Lyra. Fiona sank into her own chair behind the desk, her composure finally breaking. The story was monstrous. It was also horribly plausible. It explained everything. The reclusive inventor, Victor Blackwell's convenient role as the middleman, the sheer tragic irony of it all. Her company wasn't just built on a patent. It was built on a man's soul. Why didn't you go to the police? To the press? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I did, Kalen said, a hollow laugh escaping his lips. It was my word against his. The word of a disgraced, unstable engineer against a charismatic, wealthy businessman. I had no proof. He had destroyed it all. They laughed me out of the room. Fiona stared at him, her mind connecting a dozen disparate points of information she had never understood. The quiet janitor who always seemed so sad, his fierce, protective love for his daughter, and the signature on the wall, a silent testament to a crime that had gone unpunished for 5 years. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city her company had helped build. A city kept safe by a technology born from one man's heartbreak. A technology he had never been credited for. Don't come in for your shift tomorrow, Mr. Archer, she said, her back still to him. Kaylin's heart sank. It was happening. "Please, Miss Croft, I need this job. For my daughter." She turned around, and for the first time, he didn't see a CEO. He saw a woman whose world had just been turned upside down. Her eyes were filled with a cold, simmering fury he realized was not directed at him. "You don't work for me as a janitor anymore, Kaylin," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Tomorrow, you and I are going to have a talk. Not here, somewhere private. I have a feeling we have a monster to find." Kaylin walked out of Fiona's office in a daze, the heavy door clicking shut behind him like the closing of a vault. He felt strangely hollowed out, as if the 5 years of repressed grief and anger he just unearthed had left a void inside him. Lyra jumped up from the plush sofa in the waiting area, her book forgotten. Her face was etched with worry. "Is everything okay, Dad? Did I get you in trouble?" He knelt, pulling his daughter into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair. He breathed in her familiar scent of apple shampoo and pencil shavings, the only thing in his life that still felt real. "No, sweetie, you didn't get me in trouble. You were brave. You always are." He couldn't tell her the truth. How could he explain that her simple, honest observation had cracked open a tomb, releasing monsters he had tried so hard to keep locked away? He just held her tighter, a silent promise to protect her from the fallout. Fiona's assistant, a kind-faced woman named Clara, gave him a sympathetic look as he signed out. "Ms. Croft said you have the next few days off. Paid. Family emergency." Kaylin just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He took Lyra's hand, and they walked through the silent, empty halls of Croft Automotive. The gleaming logos on the walls, the posters of award-winning cars, they all seemed to mock him. This was his kingdom, a place built from his mind and his heartbreak, and he had been scrubbing its floors on his hands and knees. As he and Lyra took the long bus ride home, Kaylin's mind was a storm of fear and a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope. For 5 years, he had been alone with his secret. Now, someone else knew. Not just anyone, but Fiona Croft. A woman with the power to either destroy him completely or give him the one thing he thought he'd lost forever, a chance at justice. Back in the penthouse, Fiona stood motionless in her office for a long time after Kaylin left. The confession echoed in the silent room. He took everything. The story was a poison, seeping into the foundations of her life. Her father, a man she revered, had been an unwitting pawn in a monstrous crime. The company she had poured her soul into was a monument to that crime. The very safety features that she championed in her marketing campaigns, the ones that saved lives every day, were the legacy of a woman named Elena Archer, a legacy stolen by a predator. Her grief for Kaylin's loss was real and sharp, but it was quickly being forged into something harder, colder. It was rage. A calculated ice-cold fury. Victor Blackwell hadn't just destroyed Kaylin Archer. He had made a fool of her father. He had made a liar out of her. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Mark, it's Fiona. I need you to do something for me. Off the books. I want everything you can find on a man named Victor Blackwell, CEO of Apex Dynamics. And I want to know everything about the original sale of patent 7,138,914. I don't care how deep you have to dig. I want to know who was paid, how they were paid, and where the money went. And Mark, no one can know you're doing this. Not even my board." The next afternoon, Kaylin's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. St. Catherine's Park, gazebo by the pond. 3 p.m., come alone. He knew who it was from. The park was a neutral public space, impossible to bug, easy to watch for tails. It was a smart choice. When he arrived, Fiona Croft was already there, sitting on a bench inside the old wooden gazebo. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in simple jeans and a dark coat, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked less like a CEO and more like an ordinary person. but her eyes still held that same fierce intelligence. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat on the opposite bench, a careful distance between them. "You said you wanted to talk," Kalen replied, his voice tense. "I do," she said, her gaze direct. "Last night I had my head of security, a man I trust with my life, run a deep background check on Victor Blackwell. What I found makes your story even more believable. He has a history of hostile takeovers, of pushing partners out of startups. He's been sued half a dozen times, but he always settles out of court, burying the accusations under non-disclosure agreements. He's slick, and he's careful." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Kalen, I believe you. Every word. What he did to you, to your wife's memory. It's unforgivable. And he did it using my family's money. That makes this my fight, too." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him washed over Kalen. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. "What can we do?" He destroyed all the evidence. "He thinks he did," Fiona corrected him. "Men like Blackwell, men driven by pure ego, they always make mistakes. They keep trophies. They get sloppy. We just need to find the one loose thread he missed. We need to find something he couldn't destroy, something that links him directly to the theft. A paper trail, an old email, a witness. Anything." Kalen racked his brain, sifting through the wreckage of his past. The lab notebooks, the server backups, the prototypes. Victor had been meticulous. He'd had the lab professionally wiped, all digital records erased. "The lab," Kalen said slowly, a memory stirring. "It was an old warehouse. After Victor locked me out, he kept it for another month before the demolition. He said he was disposing of hazardous materials. He was destroying the evidence." "And you think he might have missed something?" Fiona pressed. "I don't know, but there was a man, the foreman of the demolition crew. His name was Russo. A decent man. I tried to talk to him back then, to get him to let me inside to salvage some personal effects. He refused. Said his orders from Blackwell were absolute. Level the building and everything in it. But he looked guilty. He knew something wasn't right." Fiona's eyes lit up with a strategic fire. "A witness." "Someone who saw what Blackwell was so desperate to hide." "Do you know where to find him?" "I think so," Kalen said, the gears in his mind turning for the first time in 5 years, not with grief, but with purpose. He had a daughter who was sick. I remember talking to him about it. He said he was working demolition to pay her medical bills. Maybe I can find him through the hospital records." "Good," Fiona said, a grim smile touching her lips. "That's our first step. Find Russo." She stood up, pulling her collar against the autumn chill. "Kalen, you need to understand something. This is dangerous. Blackwell is not just a corporate thief. He's ruthless. If he finds out we're digging, he will come after us. He'll come after you, and he'll come after Lyra." The mention of his daughter sent a chill down Kalen's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. He looked Fiona in the eye, his own resolve hardening into steel. "He already took everything from me once," Kalen said, his voice low and steady. "I won't let him do it again. I'll do whatever it takes." As Fiona walked away, disappearing into the crowd of the park, Kalen stayed in the gazebo, a plan beginning to form. Hope was a dangerous thing, but for the first time in a long, long time, he felt its warmth spreading through him. He didn't notice the black car parked across the street from the park, or the man in the driver's seat who lowered a camera with a long focus lens, a photograph of the CEO and the janitor now saved on a memory card. Victor Blackwell had been alerted the moment Fiona's security chief started digging, and he had already put them under surveillance. In an office of smoked glass and black chrome that overlooked the city from a different, sharper angle, Victor Blackwell stared at the image on his tablet. The photograph was crystal clear. Fiona Croft and Kalen Archer, sitting on opposite benches in a public gazebo, their expressions grim and conspiratorial. The janitor and the CEO. A slow, cold smile spread across Victor's face. He wasn't surprised. He had built his empire, Apex Dynamics, on the simple principle that everyone had a weakness. Fiona's was her father's legacy. Kaylin's was his daughter, and both of them suffered from a foolish, sentimental belief in justice. "So, the ghost is talking," Victor murmured to the empty room. He swiped to the next file on his screen, a detailed report from his security team. It detailed Fiona's off-the-books inquiry into his past and the patent sale. It was clumsy, predictable. He had spent years building a digital fortress around that transaction, burying it under layers of shell corporations and legal firewalls. But Kaylin was different. He wasn't a file to be deleted. He was a loose end. Victor had assumed that 5 years of poverty and disgrace would have broken him completely. To see him now, meeting with Fiona Croft, meant the man's spirit hadn't been extinguished. It had merely been dormant. "A mistake," Victor said softly, his smile vanishing. He had allowed Kaylin to live, to wallow in his misery. He had seen it as a fitting, poetic punishment. Now he saw it for what it was, a strategic error, an error that needed to be corrected. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "He's starting to be a problem," Victor said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I want you to send him a message. Something personal. Remind him what he still has left to lose." Meanwhile, Kaylin was a man possessed. For the first time in 5 years, the fog of grief had lifted, replaced by the sharp, electric focus of a mission. He dropped Lyra off at school, promising to pick her up for a surprise afternoon trip to the Science Museum, a place they hadn't been able to afford in years, thanks to the advance Fiona had given him. Then he went to the public library. He couldn't risk using his home computer. He spent hours hunched over a terminal, a ghost from a past life reawakened. The engineer inside him, the meticulous researcher, took over. He searched old Union databases for demolition crews active 5 years ago. He cross-referenced names with public hospital records, looking for any foreman named Russo with a daughter who had undergone long-term treatment. The search was a frustrating maze of dead ends and outdated information. But Kaylin was relentless. He remembered Russo mentioning his daughter had a rare blood disorder. He narrowed his search to pediatric hematology wings. After 4 hours of painstaking work, a name finally flashed on the screen: Isabella Russo, treated at St. Jude's Memorial. Father, Frank Russo. The file listed a last known address in a working-class suburb an hour outside the city. Kaylin felt a jolt of adrenaline. He had a target. He printed the address, his heart pounding with a nervous energy he hadn't felt since the old days in the lab. That evening, as he walked up the cracked pavement to his small apartment building, a feeling of unease washed over him. The front door to the building, usually locked, was slightly ajar. He pushed it open cautiously. Everything seemed normal. But when he reached his own apartment on the second floor, he saw it. The lock was scratched, the wood around the deadbolt splintered, as if someone had tried to force it open and then thought better of it. His blood ran cold. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking, and unlocked the door. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the tiny living room. Nothing seemed out of place. The old sofa, the small TV, the stack of Lyra's library books on the coffee table, all were exactly as he had left them. It wasn't a robbery. It was something worse. He walked slowly into Lyra's bedroom, and then he saw it. On her neatly made bed, right in the center of her pillow, was her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out teddy bear named Barnaby. But something was wrong. Barnaby's right eye, a black plastic button, was missing. It had been carefully, deliberately sliced off. Kaylin stood frozen in the doorway, a primal, suffocating fear gripping him. Nothing else in the room was touched. The message was surgical in its precision. We were here. We can get to her. We can take away the things she loves. It was Victor's signature, a threat delivered not with a shout, but with a cold, cruel whisper. The fear lasted for a moment, and then it was consumed by a white-hot, blinding rage. This wasn't about patents or money anymore. This was about his daughter. Victor had crossed a line. The next morning, Kalen drove a rental car, paid for by Fiona's cash, out to the address he'd found. It was a small, modest house with a neatly kept lawn. A tired-looking man in his late 50s was on the porch, fixing a squeaky hinge on the screen door. "Frank Russo?" Kalen asked, his voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline inside him. The man looked up, his eyes, weary and sad, widened in recognition, and then narrowed in fear. "I don't know you," he said, his voice rough. He immediately turned back to the hinge. "Yes, you do," Kalen said, stepping onto the porch. "5 years ago, the warehouse demolition. You were the foreman." "We spoke." Russo dropped his screwdriver. It clattered on the wooden planks. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now, I have nothing to say to you." "I'm not here to cause trouble, Frank," Kalen said, his voice softening. "I remember you told me about your daughter, Isabella. How is she?" The mention of his daughter made Russo flinch. "She's fine. She's in remission. No thanks to men like your old partner." He finally turned to face Kalen, his face a mixture of fear and long-held resentment. "That man, Blackwell. He paid me a lot of money to keep my mouth shut. Paid for my daughter's treatment. He told me if I ever spoke a word about what I saw in that warehouse, the money would stop, and my daughter would be out of the program. He said worse things would happen. Do you understand? I have a family to protect." "He threatened my daughter yesterday," Kalen said, his voice flat and cold. "That's why I'm here. He's not going to stop. Not unless we stop him. I just need you to tell me what you saw, Frank." "I need proof." Russo looked past Kalen, his eyes scanning the quiet suburban street, as if expecting Victor's thugs to appear at any moment. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the breath of a man who had been holding it for 5 years. "He was a maniac," Russo whispered, his voice trembling. "It wasn't a demolition. It was an extermination. He had his own crew in there for 2 days before we even started. They were shredding documents, smashing hard drives with sledgehammers, taking blowtorches to metal prototypes. He watched over them like a hawk. He wanted every last trace of your work turned to dust and ash." Kalen's heart sank. It was exactly as he'd feared. "So there's nothing left." "I didn't say that," Russo said, his eyes darting back to Kalen. He seemed to make a decision. "That man is a monster. He used my daughter's life to buy my silence. I'm not a brave man, Archer, but I'm not a coward either." He walked to the corner of the porch and lifted a loose floorboard. From the dark space beneath, he pulled out a dusty, oilskin-wrapped bundle. He carefully unwrapped it on the porch railing. "On the last day, after his crew was gone, I was doing a final sweep," Russo said, his voice barely audible. Something had fallen behind a heavy furnace. They missed it. He finished unwrapping the bundle. Inside was a small, metal-cased external hard drive. It was mangled, dented, and blackened with soot, with a deep gash across its surface. It looked like a piece of junk. "His goons tried to destroy it, but this thing is military grade," Russo said, tapping the ruined casing. "They probably thought they'd done enough. I found it. I don't know if anything on it survived, but I kept it, as insurance. Or maybe because my conscience wouldn't let me throw it away." He pushed the ruined hard drive across the railing toward Kalen. "Here, take it, and for God's sake, be careful. If Blackwell finds out I talked to you, he'll burn us all." Kalen drove away from Frank Russo's house with the damaged hard drive resting on the passenger seat like a time bomb. It was heavy in a way that went beyond its physical weight. It was the weight of 5 years of silence, of a father's guilt, and a husband's grief. It was either the key to his salvation or a useless hunk of metal that represented his last failed hope. The first thing he did was call Fiona. He pulled over into a quiet side street, his hands still trembling slightly from the encounter with Russo and the chilling threat to Lyra. "I have something," he said, his voice low and urgent, the moment she picked up. "I found Russo." He gave me a hard drive. Blackwell's crew tried to destroy it, but Russo saved it. It's in bad shape, Fiona. Really bad. He then told her about the teddy bear, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fury. He went into my daughter's room. He's sending a message. There was a moment of cold silence on the other end of the line. When Fiona spoke, her voice was glacial. The monster just made his second mistake. His first was underestimating you. His second is thinking he can scare me. Her tone shifted, becoming all business. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere public. There's a man I use for sensitive data recovery. His name is Jasper. He's the best there is, a digital ghost. He works out of an old electronics repair shop in the industrial district. It's a front. I'm sending you the address now. I'll meet you there in an hour. And Kaylin, stay off the main roads. The address that appeared on his phone led him to a grimy, forgotten corner of the city. Jasper's Vintage Electronics, the faded sign read. The display window was filled with dusty tube televisions and obsolete radios from a bygone era. It looked like a place where technology went to die. A small bell tinkled as Kaylin entered. The man behind the counter was a study in contrasts. He was young, no older than 30, with a shock of bright purple hair and a series of intricate tattoos running up his neck. But his eyes were ancient and sharp, missing nothing. This had to be Jasper. You must be the friend of the collector, Jasper said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. It was clearly a code. She sent me, Kaylin confirmed, placing the mangled hard drive on the counter. Jasper picked it up, his tattooed fingers surprisingly gentle. He turned it over, examining the deep gash in the soot-blackened casing with the discerning eye of a surgeon inspecting a wound. Someone really wanted this to stay dead. Just then, Fiona Croft walked in, the bell tinkling again. She was dressed down once more, but her presence seemed to suck the air out of the small, cluttered shop. "Can you save it?" she asked Jasper, her voice cutting straight to the point. Jasper carried the drive to a workbench in the back that looked less like a repair station and more like a high-tech surgical theater. He plugged a series of cables into the damaged ports, his eyes fixed on a bank of monitors. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across one screen. Another showed a complex diagnostic schematic of the drive's internal platters. "The casing is military grade, just as you said," Jasper mused, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "But the impact did some serious damage to the reader head assembly. The platters themselves might be intact. It's like trying to read a book with a broken magnifying glass in the dark. It's going to be slow. Very slow." "How slow?" Kaylin pressed, his anxiety mounting. "If the data is still there, and that's a big if," Jasper said, not looking up from his screen. "I might be able to start pulling coherent files in 24 to 48 hours. I'll have to reconstruct the file system from scratch. I'll call you the second I have anything." The next day was the longest of Kaylin's life. He kept Lyra home from school, telling her the school had a plumbing issue, a lie that felt flimsy and transparent. They spent the day at the Science Museum as promised, but Kaylin couldn't focus. He watched every person who lingered near them, every car that drove by too slowly. Victor's threat had turned the entire world into a landscape of potential dangers. He saw threats in every shadow. He had explicitly warned Lyra that morning, making it sound like a game. "There's a new rule for a while," he'd said, his voice artificially light. "No one picks you up from school but me. Ever. Not even if they say I sent them. Not even if they know your name. It's our secret rule. Okay?" Lyra, sensing the seriousness beneath his tone, had simply nodded. The call from the school came at 3:15 p.m., just as he was preparing to leave to pick her up. It was her teacher, Mrs. Gable, and her voice was tight with alarm. "Mr. Archer?" "It's Carol Gable. Something just happened here. I think you need to come down immediately." Kaylin's heart stopped. "Is Lyra okay?" "What happened?" "She's fine." "She's safe with me in the classroom," Mrs. Gable said quickly. "But a man just tried to pick her up." He came to the front office, said you were stuck in a meeting and had sent him. He knew her name, your name. He was very convincing. But Lyra, she did exactly what she was supposed to do. She remembered your rule. She refused to go with him and ran straight to me. The man left before we could get security. Kaylin was out the door before Mrs. Gable finished speaking, a blind, cold terror propelling him forward. He broke every speed limit getting to the school. He found Lyra in her classroom, sitting beside her teacher, her face pale but her expression defiant. He swept her up in his arms, holding her so tightly she grunted in protest. "You did so good, sweetie," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with a terror he couldn't hide. "You were so smart, so brave." He was walking her to the car, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, the world feeling fragile and hostile around them. He was a janitor. Victor Blackwell was a billionaire. How could he possibly protect her from a man with limitless resources and no conscience? He felt a wave of helplessness so profound it almost brought him to his knees. It was in that moment of despair that his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but some instinct made him answer. "Hello? I have it." The voice was low, gravelly, and electric with excitement. It was Jasper. "It took me all night, but I bypassed the damaged sectors and rebuilt the primary index. It's fragmented, but it's here. Kaylin, I've found a video file." "A video file?" Kaylin repeated, his voice tight. The world seemed to shrink down to the voice on the phone, and his daughter's small hand clutching his. His fear for Lyra and the sudden, shocking hope from Jasper's words warred within him. "What's on it?" "Can't tell yet. It's corrupted, playing back in fragments, but I can see two figures arguing in what looks like a lab. The audio is what I'm trying to restore now," Jasper said. "You need to see this, but don't come here. The friend of the collector. She said you're hot. My shop is clean, but I don't like visitors when the oven is on." Kaylin understood. He clicked off the phone and immediately dialed Fiona. He explained the attempted abduction and Jasper's discovery in a torrent of frantic, whispered words. "He tried to take her, Fiona. He went for my daughter." The rage in Fiona's voice was a palpable force, even through the phone. "He just signed his own death warrant. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere. I have a corporate apartment, a safe house, fully stocked. It's a ghost in the city records. No one knows I have it. I'm sending the address. Get Lyra there now. I'll meet you in 30 minutes. The apartment was on the 20th floor of a discreet, anonymous residential tower. It was elegantly furnished but felt sterile, unlived in. For Lyra, it was a grand adventure. For Kaylin, it was a gilded cage. He locked and deadbolted the door, his eyes scanning the street below, searching for the black car he now saw everywhere. Fiona arrived 20 minutes later, not with a briefcase, but with a heavy-duty, encrypted laptop and a look of grim determination on her face. She knelt down to Lyra's level first. "That was a very brave thing you did today, Lyra," Fiona said, her voice warm and sincere. "Your father is very proud of you. I am too." She then handed Lyra a tablet she'd brought. "I've loaded this with every game and movie you could possibly want. Why don't you go explore the bedroom? We have some boring grown-up stuff to talk about." As soon as Lyra was out of sight, Fiona's demeanor shifted back to the cold fury Kaylin had seen in her office. "Jasper is patching in through a secure, anonymous network. He's ready to stream the file." She set up the laptop on the dining room table. A moment later, Jasper's face appeared in a small window, looking tired but exhilarated. "All right, kids," he said, his voice tinny through the speakers. "Let's see what we've dug up." The video is from a lab security camera, time-stamped 5 years ago. The audio was a mess, but I managed to isolate the voice tracks. I'm sending it now. What you're about to see? It's raw footage. A video player filled the screen. The image was grainy, black and white, the angle high from a corner of a room Kaylin knew as well as his own skin. It was his old lab. And there they were, Two figures, younger, angrier versions of himself and Victor Blackwell. The video was silent for a moment as the two men gesticulated wildly. Then, the audio crackled to life. "Can't sell it, Victor. It's not ready." His own voice, raw with desperation, filled the apartment. "It's for Elena." Victor's face, captured in the grainy footage, was a mask of reptilian greed. "Elena's dead," he snarled, the words dripping with venom. "This isn't a memorial, it's a gold mine. I am not letting your sentimentality get in the way of a billion-dollar deal." Kalen flinched as if struck, the words as painful now as they had been then. Beside him, Fiona's hands clenched into tight fists on the table. The Kalen on the screen was pleading, "It's my work, my name, you can't—" "Your name?" Victor laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Your name is about to be mud. I've already set the stage. I have emails showing your erratic behavior. I have a witness who will testify you tried to sell our research to a competitor. By the time I'm done, everyone in this industry will think you're an unstable, grieving fool who tried to commit corporate espionage. I will destroy you, Kalen. I will ruin you so completely that no one will ever listen to a word you say again. This invention, your wife's little tribute, it's mine now." The finality, the sheer premeditated evil in those words, hung in the air. The video ended with Victor lunging forward, shoving the on-screen Kalen hard against a workbench. The camera shook violently, and the feed cut to static. Silence. The only sound in the room was a soft, choked sob. Kalen turned. Fiona Croft was staring at the screen, her face pale, her composure utterly shattered. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and unstoppable. They weren't tears of pity. They were tears of profound, soul-shaking rage, of guilt, of a grief that was not her own, but that she now felt with the force of a physical blow. She was crying for the man on the screen, a grieving husband being brutally stripped of his last connection to his dead wife. She was crying for the woman named Elena, whose memory was being desecrated for profit. She was crying for the ugly, terrible truth of the world, that a monster like Victor Blackwell could win. And she was crying for her own unwitting role in it all, for the billions she and her company had made while the true inventor was scrubbing her floors, his heart broken, his spirit crushed. The secret was out, and it had left the CEO in tears. Kalen watched her, his own grief momentarily forgotten, replaced by a strange sense of vindication. He wasn't crazy. It had all happened. Fiona's sobs subsided, replaced by a long, shuddering breath. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears had washed away her composure and left behind something far more dangerous. Pure, unyielding steel. She looked at Kalen, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "He didn't just bury your career that day," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He buried a confession." She closed the laptop with a sharp, final snap. "Now," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, "we're going to dig it up and bury him with it." The grainy image of Victor Blackwell's face, contorted with rage and greed, seemed to be burned onto the dark screen of the laptop. The air in the safe house was thick with the aftershock of the confession. Kalen felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he'd just watched a scene from a movie, a tragedy about some other man. But the raw, trembling fury emanating from Fiona Croft was undeniably real. "He gave us the weapon," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "He handed us the very knife he used to stab you in the back." She began to pace the length of the spacious living room, not with nervous energy, but with the caged intensity of a predator. "We can't just leak this. Blackwell's legal team would tear it apart. They'd claim it was a deep fake, manufactured by a rival. He'd bury us in lawsuits and injunctions. The police. It would be better. But a man like him can tie up the justice system for years. The video would get locked away in an evidence locker while he walks free on bail." She stopped, turning to face Kalen, her eyes alight with a brilliant, ruthless fire. "No. For what he did, a quiet conviction is not enough. He built his empire in the public eye. He needs to be destroyed in the public eye. We have to create a situation so public, so undeniable, that there is no escape, no spin, no plausible deniability. Kalin, seeing the strategic mind of a CEO at war, felt his own purpose sharpen. You want to set a trap. I want to build a stage, Fiona corrected him, and make him the star of his own execution. She picked up her phone and dialed her head of security. Mark, I need Victor Blackwell's schedule for the next week. Every public appearance, galas, press conferences, keynote speeches. I want to know where he's going to be, who he's going to be with, and what the media coverage will be. And I need it an hour ago. While they waited, Fiona insisted on turning the safe house into a fortress. She had 2 of her most trusted security personnel, plain-clothed, discreet, but built like brick walls, stationed in the lobby and on their floor. They're not to leave your side until this is over, she told Kalin. Lyra's safety is the priority. An hour later, Fiona's laptop chimed. Mark's report was thorough. Victor Blackwell was scheduled to be the guest of honor at the annual Automotive Innovation Gala in 2 days. It was the industry's most prestigious event. A black tie affair crawling with journalists, investors, and the most powerful figures in the tech world. He was slated to receive the Visionary of the Year award. The irony, Kalin breathed, a bitter taste in his mouth. He's getting an award for the work he stole from me. And that, Fiona said with a grim smile, is our stage. Her mind was already working, dissecting the problem into a series of strategic moves. An awards ceremony. There will be a massive screen behind the podium for presentations, for the live feed. The entire event will be live streamed. If we can hijack that feed. How? Kalin asked. A place like that will have professional AV, state-of-the-art security. And it will all be run by contractors, Fiona countered, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Contractors hire technicians. People have prices, people have loyalties, people have weaknesses. Mark is already looking into the production company handling the event. We will find a way in. The plan began to take shape over the next few hours, a desperate, high-stakes piece of corporate sabotage. Fiona's team found their vulnerability. The lead AV technician for the gala was a young man who had once been an intern at Croft Automotive. Fiona had personally mentored him. His loyalty, Mark assured her, was to her, not to the temporary contracting gig. He would be their inside man. He would be able to switch the feed at the crucial moment, but only for about 60 seconds before the system's security protocols would trace the override and shut it down. 60 seconds, Kalin said, looking at the video file on the laptop. Victor's confession, from the moment he says, "Elena's dead," to the end, is 58 seconds long. It was perfect. Jasper can clean up the audio, sharpen the image, add subtitles, Fiona planned aloud. It will be undeniable. Her phone rang. It was Mark again. "We have a problem," his voice crackled. "Blackwell just changed the event schedule. He's added a surprise segment to his acceptance speech. He's going to announce the launch of the Blackwell Foundation for Traffic Safety. His first act will be a multi-million-dollar donation to the city's trauma centers." Kalin felt sick. Victor wasn't just getting an award for the Angel Guard system. He was going to use Elena's memory, the very tragedy that inspired it, as a prop for his own philanthropy. It was the ultimate desecration. "That monster?" Fiona whispered, her face pale with disgust. "No," Kalin said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked at Fiona, his expression hardening. "This is good for us." Fiona looked at him, confused. "Good? He's turning your wife's death into a PR stunt." "Yes," Kalin agreed. "And that's when we spring the trap. Not at the beginning of his speech. Not at the end. We hit him at the precise moment he announces the foundation. We let him stand on that stage and talk about traffic safety. We let him build himself up as a saint. And then, when his ego is at its absolute peak, we show the world who he really is. We let his own words tear him down." Fiona stared at him, a newfound respect in her eyes. The beaten-down janitor was gone. In his place was the brilliant strategist, the man who understood his enemy's mind. He knew exactly which blow would be the most devastating. "You're right," she said softly. "We'll let him build his own gallows." The plan was set. The trap was ready. For the next 48 hours, Kaylin and Lyra stayed hidden in the apartment, the world outside holding its breath. Kaylin spent the time watching old movies with his daughter, trying to project a sense of calm he was nowhere close to feeling. Every minute felt like an hour. He was hovering on the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap that would either see him fly or send him crashing into the abyss below. That night, on the eve of the gala, he stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom, watching Lyra sleep. Her face was peaceful, untroubled, her damaged teddy bear, Barnaby, tucked under her arm. He had carefully sewn the button eye back on. It was a small, simple act of repair, but it felt monumental. He was putting the broken pieces of his life back together. He thought of Elena, of her bright, fierce spirit. He thought of the 5 years of darkness. Tomorrow, he would step back into the light, not as a victim, but as a father fighting for his daughter, and as a husband fighting for the memory of his wife. Tomorrow, the ghost would have his say. The night of the Automotive Innovation Gala was a symphony of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with polite laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the murmur of billion-dollar deals being struck between courses. Fiona Croft, seated at a table near the front, was the picture of corporate elegance. She smiled, she engaged in small talk, she projected an aura of unshakable calm. But beneath the surface, her nerves were stretched taut. Every time she glanced at the massive screen behind the stage, her heart hammered against her ribs. Miles away, in a nondescript commercial van parked 3 blocks from the gala, Kaylin Archer sat beside Jasper in a cramped mobile command center. The van was packed with humming servers and monitors displaying a dozen different camera feeds from inside the ballroom. The AV technician, a young man named Leo, sat at the main console, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "The feed is ours," Leo whispered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I've created a loop of the Foundation's logo. When you give the signal, I bypass the main server and patch in Jasper's video file. We'll have 58 seconds before their system flags the override and cuts us off." Kaylin's eyes were glued to the main monitor, which showed a live feed of the stage. He had left Lyra at the safe house with Clara, Fiona's trusted assistant, and 2 security guards. She was safe. He had repeated that to himself 100 times, but the fear for her was a constant cold knot in his stomach. This had to work. He watched as Victor Blackwell glad-handed his way through the room, exuding a charisma that was almost hypnotic. He was the king in his court, accepting congratulations, his teeth flashing in a predatory smile. Kaylin felt a surge of cold hatred. Finally, the moment arrived. The presenter, a famous industry journalist, announced the winner of the Visionary of the Year award, a man whose commitment to safety and innovation is an inspiration to us all. Mr. Victor Blackwell. The ballroom erupted in applause. Victor strode to the stage, bathed in the glow of the spotlights. He accepted the heavy crystal award, holding it aloft for the cameras. He began his speech, his voice smooth and practiced. He thanked the committee, his team, his investors. He spoke of a future with 0 traffic fatalities. Kaylin's hands clenched into fists. In the van, the silence was absolute. "And now," Victor said, his voice swelling with false emotion, "I want to share something deeply personal. True innovation isn't just about technology. It's about heart. It's about protecting our loved ones. It's in that spirit that I am proud to announce the formation of the Blackwell Foundation for Traffic Safety." The screen behind him lit up with the Foundation's elegant logo. The crowd murmured in approval, some beginning to applaud the grand philanthropic gesture. "To launch the foundation," Victor continued, his smile at its widest, I am making an inaugural donation of $10 million to our city's trauma centers to help the families affected by tragic accidents. In the van, Kalin leaned forward, his eyes locked on Victor's triumphant face. He saw the ghost of Elena, the memory of the hospital, the 5 years of darkness. He thought of Lyra's teddy bear, its eyes sliced out. He pressed the button on his headset. His voice was a dead calm whisper. Now. On the console, Leo's fingers danced. Feed is live. In the ballroom, the Foundation's logo on the giant screen flickered. For a split second, it was replaced by a screen of pure static, causing a confused murmur to ripple through the audience. Victor, momentarily thrown off, paused his speech, and then it appeared. Grainy, black and white footage of a dark industrial lab. The confused murmurs quieted, replaced by a tense, curious silence. On screen, a younger Victor Blackwell was shouting. The audio, cleaned up by Jasper, was crystal clear, blasting through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. Elena's dead! This isn't a memorial, it's a gold mine. A collective gasp went through the room. On stage, Victor Blackwell's smile froze, then melted into a mask of raw, slack-jawed shock. His eyes darted from the screen to the audience, his face draining of all color. I will destroy you, Kalin. I will ruin you so completely that no one will ever listen to a word you say again. This invention, it's mine now. The journalists in the room were already scrambling, their phones held up, recording. The live stream was broadcasting every horrific second to the world. The room was utterly silent, the only sound Victor's own recorded voice, dripping with venom and greed, confessing his crimes. On stage, Victor was trapped in the spotlight, a deer in the headlights of his own making. He frantically waved his arms at the AV booth at the back of the room. But it was useless. The video ended with Victor lunging forward. The screen cut back to static for a second, and then to the benign logo of the Automotive Innovation Gala. A deafening, profound silence hung in the air for 3 long seconds. It was broken by a single, sharp sound. From her table near the front, Fiona Croft began to applaud, slowly and deliberately. Then, the room exploded into chaos. Reporters surged toward the stage, shouting questions. Mr. Blackwell, was that you in the video? Who is Kalin? Did you steal the Angel Guard patent? Victor stumbled backward, his face a grotesque canvas of terror. He looked like a cornered animal, his empire, his reputation, his entire life dissolving around him in 58 seconds. He turned to flee, but his path was blocked. Security guards were moving onto the stage, their faces grim, and pushing through the panicked crowd from the main entrance was a group of men and women in dark suits, their badges identifying them as federal agents. Fiona had made one last call just before the video aired. In the van, Kalin watched as 2 agents flanked a stunned, babbling Victor Blackwell. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel joy. He just felt quiet. A profound, bone-deep sense of peace. The weight he had been carrying for 5 years was finally gone. Jasper let out a long, low whistle. Well, he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. You don't see that every day. Kalin leaned back in his chair, the tension draining out of him, leaving him weak and trembling. He closed his eyes. The ghost had spoken, and the whole world had heard him. The chaos in the ballroom was a distant, muted roar on the monitor. Kalin watched as the federal agents led a pale, shell-shocked Victor Blackwell off the stage, his Visionary of the Year award lying forgotten on the podium. The king had been dethroned in his own court. Jasper let out a long, slow breath and began shutting down the equipment with practiced efficiency. And that, my friend, he said, clapping a hand on Kalin's shoulder, is what you call a hostile takeover. The young AV tech, Leo, was just staring at the screen, his mouth agape. Did we just do that? But Kalin was already taking off his headset. The rage, the fear, the adrenaline that had fueled him for the past 48 hours evaporated. leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, and one single, overwhelming need. "I have to go to my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't wait for a reply. He was out of the van and running, not towards the gala, but away from it, hailing a taxi with a trembling hand. The entire ride to the safe house was a blur. He felt like a deep-sea diver ascending too quickly, his body and mind struggling to adjust to a world without the crushing pressure he'd lived under for so long. Inside the ballroom, Fiona Croft navigated the pandemonium with a preternatural calm. As Victor was being escorted out, she was approached by the lead federal agent, a stern-faced woman named Agent Thorne. "Ms. Croft," the agent said, her eyes sharp and assessing. "That was quite a show. I have a feeling you know more about this than you're letting on." "I do," Fiona replied evenly. She handed the agent a slim, encrypted data slate from her clutch. "On this device, you'll find the original, unedited video file, a sworn affidavit from the forensic expert who recovered it, contact information for a material witness named Frank Russo, and a full statement from the man Victor Blackwell just confessed to destroying. His name is Kalen Archer. He is the true inventor of the Angel Guard system." The agent took the slate, her expression unreadable. "You seem to have thought of everything." "A man like Victor Blackwell leaves nothing to chance," Fiona said, her voice like ice. "I decided to take a page from his book." When Kalen finally reached the apartment, he fumbled with the key card, his hand still shaking. The moment the door opened, Lyra was there. She launched herself into his arms, wrapping her small frame around him. "Did you see it, Dad?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Clara let me watch the news. They're talking about you. They said your name." He lifted her up, his face buried in her hair, and for the first time in 5 years, he didn't have to fake a smile. The tears that came were not of grief or fear, but of pure, unadulterated relief. The weight was gone. He was no longer a ghost. He was just a father holding his child. The days that followed were a media tsunami. The gala confession was the biggest story in the world. Victor Blackwell's empire, Apex Dynamics, collapsed like a house of cards. His board resigned, his investors fled, and he was hit with a mountain of federal charges from which there was no escape. The video was the ultimate proof, his own words, his final judge. A week later, Kalen found himself walking through the halls of Croft Automotive once more. But this time, he wasn't pushing a mop bucket. He was wearing a new suit, a gift from Fiona, and he was walking toward the penthouse office not as an employee, but as a guest. Fiona greeted him at the door, not from behind her desk. She gestured for him to sit in one of the leather chairs, the same one he had collapsed into in despair just a week earlier. The framed patent was gone from the wall. "The legal team says the case against him is ironclad," she began, her tone warm and professional. "He'll be in prison for a very long time. His assets have been frozen. A portion of them will be allocated for restitution. To you," she slid a folder across the desk. "This is a preliminary calculation of the patent royalties you should have been paid over the past 5 years, plus damages. It's a significant number, Kalen. You and Lyra will be taken care of for the rest of your lives." Kalen opened the folder and stared at the figure. It was an astronomical sum, enough to make his head spin. But as he looked at it, he felt a surprising lack of emotion. The money was a tool, a means to give Lyra the future she deserved. But it wasn't the prize. "Thank you, Fiona," he said, closing the folder. "For everything. I haven't even gotten to the real reason I asked you here," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. She pointed to the empty space on the wall where the patent had hung. "That belongs to you. But I have a proposition. I want to hang it back up. But this time, I want the man whose name is on it to be here, with us." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Kalen, what Victor stole from you was more than just money. He stole your purpose. I want to give it back. I'm creating a new independent research and development division at this company, the Croft Archer Advanced Safety Division. Its sole mission will be to invent the future of automotive safety with no compromises, no shortcuts. I want you to run it. You'll have an unlimited budget, your own team, complete autonomy. All I ask is that you do what you were born to do. Save lives. Kalen was speechless. He looked at Fiona, the woman who had been his boss, his secret ally, and now his partner in justice. He saw the genuine respect in her eyes. He thought of the lab, of the thrill of creation, of the mission he had started in Elena's name. It was all being handed back to him, redeemed and made whole. You don't have to answer now, Fiona said gently. I don't need to, Kalen replied, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. When do I start? 1 year later, the scent of ozone and hot metal had replaced the smell of bleach and floor polish in Kalen Archer's life. He stood in the center of the Croft Archer Advanced Safety Division, a sprawling, sunlit laboratory that felt more like an inventor's paradise than a corporate R&D wing. Whiteboards covered in complex equations flanked holographic design tables, and a team of the industry's brightest young engineers worked with a quiet, focused energy. Kalen was no longer a ghost. He moved through the space with a calm, easy confidence, the man he was always meant to be. He was dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, but he commanded more respect than any suit in the building. He had his purpose back. He was examining a 3D projection of a new sensor array when Fiona Croft walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. She no longer entered with the formal air of a CEO, but with the familiar warmth of a friend. The ordeal they had been through had forged a bond of trust and mutual respect that went far beyond the boardroom. The first production models with the fully integrated Gen 2 Angel Guard system roll off the line next week, she said, handing him a cup. Elena's legacy. It's finally real. Kalen looked at the name etched in frosted glass on the lab's main door. The Elena Archer Innovation Center. Fiona had insisted on it. She would have loved this, he said, his voice quiet. She always said the best designs were the ones that protected people. Later that afternoon, Kalen left the lab and drove a new Croft sedan, one of the first models equipped with his perfected system, to pick up Lyra from school. He watched as she ran out of the stately brick building, her backpack bouncing, her face alight with the uncomplicated joy of a child who feels safe in her world. She chattered happily on the way home, talking about her art class, her friends, and a science project she was excited about. Kalen listened, the sound of her voice the sweetest kind of music. The fear that had been his constant companion for 5 years was gone, replaced by a profound and peaceful gratitude. The money from the restitution had secured their future, but it was these simple, ordinary moments that were the real treasure. That weekend, the 3 of them, Kalen, Lyra, and Fiona, stood on a sun-dappled hill in a quiet cemetery. They had come to dedicate a new, beautifully carved granite bench in front of Elena's headstone. Lyra placed a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked at the base of the stone. I told my art teacher about Mom, she said softly, looking at her dad. I'm painting a picture of her. From that photo on your desk. The one where she's laughing, Kalen knelt and hugged her. She would love that more than anything. Fiona stood back, giving them their moment. She had become a fixture in their lives, a beloved friend to Kalen and a cherished mentor figure to Lyra. She watched them, a family made whole again not by blood, but by courage and loyalty, and felt a sense of peace that no stock price or sales report had ever given her. Kalen had not only saved his own life, he had, in a way, saved hers, reminding her of the human cost of the business she ran and the profound good it could do. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Kalen looked from Elena's name, etched in stone, to his daughter's bright, hopeful face. He had made it. He had walked through the darkest of valleys and emerged into the light on the other side. His wife's legacy was not one of tragedy, but of salvation. It lived on in every car that left the factory, in every family that made it home safe. Thank you for letting me share that story with you. I'm always curious. After the silence settles, what's the one thought or feeling that's staying with you? There's no right or wrong answer, of course. I just find that sharing those little echoes is what makes these stories truly come alive. Feel free to leave your thought in the comments below. And if you'd like to explore more worlds like this one together, make sure you're subscribed with the notification bell turned on. There are so many more journeys to take. For now, thank you for your time and your imagination. It means the world. I'll see you in the next chapter.